Mr. President.
Oh, yeah. Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I rise today because we have a crisis of confidence in our government. It's a crisis that's being driven by the Trump administration with one goal in mind: to let the well-off and the well-connected play by their own set of rules, while you, the American people, continue to scrape by. It's a crisis that puts us at a crossroads. Will we take the steps necessary to address the corruption and restore trust? Or will we break our institutions even further and usher in a golden age of corruption? In order to answer those questions, we need to have a real understanding of a few things. One, how deep is this crisis in confidence? Two, in what ways is the Trump administration putting their thumb on the scale for the well-off and the well-connected? Three, how is that impacting the rest of us? And how will it impact America's future? Four, and finally, how can we fight back? Now let's start with the crisis that we're in. When I talk about this crisis in confidence, what we're talking about is the belief that your government is working for you, that it's working for the American people, all of its people. A belief that no matter the challenge you face or the ambitions that you have, that your government has your best interest in heart. That is the fundamental credence of our democracy. That is of, by, and for the people. And that belief is always important. But when times are tough, it's even more critical than ever. Now let's be clear. These are tough times. I don't think there's a single person in America that would disagree with that. We have challenges before us. We have challenges with the high cost of living, affordability problems. It's a top issue that I hear about in my home state in New Jersey. We have a lot of crisis of confidence in this moment about whether or not we can step up as a nation and be able to rise to the challenges that we face. And the challenges we face are significant, and we have to acknowledge that. Over the past couple years, as we've recovered from a generationally defining pandemic, I've heard from so many families who just don't believe that they can get ahead. They don't believe and think that they'll do better than their parents, and that their kids won't do better than them. And I think about that in my own family situation. My parents coming here, immigrating to this nation 50 years ago. And I remember asking them why they did it. And my parents, they said to me just one simple line. They said, "We did it because we felt that here in America, we could guarantee that the family that we raise, that you and your sister would have a better life and more opportunities than we did." That was it. That was that simple. They weren't driven by greed. They weren't trying to take it all for themselves as if this was some zero-sum survival of the fittest. It was a sense of America and a sense of the opportunity that it can bring for everyone, including 2 immigrants from South Korea who were born during the Korean War into poverty and came to this nation. And now, as they get older, the challenges that they face, being seniors, the elderly, their health care, and other challenges that they face with their budget fixed. And now myself, as a father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, wondering what kind of America are my kids going to grow up in. And I know it's not just my family that worries about this. Because when the costs of basic goods go up, it makes it harder to save for everybody. And when families can't save, it makes it harder to achieve that crown jewel of the American dream, owning a home. Something that my family has struggled with over the years. Something that so many other families are facing right now as we see the cost of owning a home skyrocket. It puts that dream even more out of reach. And for those that can't own, even the cost of rental prices are going through the roof. Demoralizing people. I mean, I remember hearing from this young man, a recent college graduate, and he just came to me with just feeling so deflated. He said, I don't think I'm ever going to own a home. That's how he put it. And I have to tell you, just hearing that from him, just how pessimistic he was, just how demoralized he was about his place in our society. But it wasn't just about his place. It was about this moment for this country and the fact that he doesn't see us moving in a trajectory where someone like himself and people in his generation are going to be able to have that opportunity and that chance that generations before had. So you throw in that rising cost of higher education that he's struggling with, trying to pay off the bills, trying to keep up with student debt. And you have that general sense that we're losing, that sense that we're part of something bigger than all of us. And it's easy to understand why people just don't think the system that should be working for them is working for them. And that's the place that we're in right now. That in this moment we find ourselves living through the moment of the greatest amount of inequality in our nation's history. Even worse than the robber baron age that we studied about in history books. That somehow we see just such extraordinary wealth, but for just a few. Whereas the vast majority of Americans are struggling paycheck to paycheck, won't be able to step up if they face some type of crisis, a car accident or something else that could just lead them into catastrophe. That lack of trust is very clear in the numbers that we see from the American people. A Pew study from last summer showed that public trust in the federal government is at approximately 22%. And in 2023, only 16% said that the government, quote, always or most of the time is something that you can trust. According to Pew, that was amongst the lowest tally in nearly 70 years. That number was reflected in a survey conducted by the Partnership for Public Service in the spring of 2024. Their research shows that only 23% of Americans trust the federal government. That's down from 35% the year before. We're just seeing it go down and down and down. Only 15% think the government is transparent, down from 21% the year before. This erosion that we're continuing to see in our country and in the public trust has to be at top of mind. Because how can a government function? How can a democracy function with that much distrust? Alarming in that group is trust amongst people age 18 to 34. That age group of that young man I told you about who had such pessimism about his future. And in that group, we saw trust decline by half, from 30% to 15%. Now, you might think this is just maybe a red state problem. But let me tell you, it's a massive issue in my home state in New Jersey as well. In May of 2023, a poll by Fairleigh Dickinson University showed that over 80% of New Jersey residents, believe that their state's politicians are corrupt. That shows you just such a devastating number of the distrust that is out there and how widespread it is. I remember, we've certainly had our challenges of late in New Jersey, and when you see the corruption, when you hear about the news of indictments and convictions, I remember one time I went to a neighbor of mine, asked him what he thought about the state of corruption in New Jersey, and he just said, "That's New Jersey." Just threw up his hands. This sense of helplessness, this sense of apathy, this sense that that's just how things are now. There's nothing we can do about it. Now, there are a variety of reasons why this is the case in New Jersey, but it all comes back to the same thing. A singular question. Are the people in your government working for you, or are they working for themselves? Are they trying to lift up their own personal wealth, or look out for their friends or their associates, their families, for special interest? I always often felt like one of the most important questions you can get a sense from the people is this question of, do your elected officials, do your government officials care about you? Because sometimes it just feels like we're in this moment in this country where we have this crisis of empathy right now. That we are losing touch with that idea that we're part of something bigger than all of us. We're having trouble. We're struggling to be able to see the world through someone else's eyes and walk in their shoes. And in this nation of over 330 million people, how can we continue if we continue to only think about ourselves and lose sight of that which is around us? Now, obviously, this is all the more important in times like these when we need our government working to solve the problems that we face. And as we said, we face significant challenges. So what happens when we have a government where the people aren't working in the public interest, when those that are charged by the people to take up the public common good are not following through? What happens when we have a government where those people working to protect the public interest are fired, are pushed out, or marginalized? Luckily for us, history may not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The Founding Fathers established the federal workforce to be one built on merit. It was something that they took quite seriously. So seriously, in fact, that during debate in the weeks after Washington's first inauguration, James Madison stated that, quote, "wanton removal of a meritorious officer is an impeachable offense." George Washington himself wrote that appointments into public service would be the most difficult and delicate part of his work. In A History of the Federal Service, a report published by the Office of Personnel Management, the evolution of this debate from one of merit first to one of political gain becomes very apparent. As political parties grew, so did the pendulum swing of retaliation and actions that further politicized public servant positions. But the dam broke just a generation after the founding of the Republic. The Tenure of Office Act of 1820, not exactly a household name, was one of the first dominoes to fall that led to what was eventually called the spoils system. By limiting the terms of many officials to 4 years corresponding to the president, it basically meant that public servants would come in and out with the tides of the presidency, and not based on need or qualifications, just the pendulum swing of partisanship, the qualification being that of loyalty rather than skill or merit. And the impact of the spoils system became very apparent, which was wholesale patronage and corruption, and a rejection of the status quo that looks very familiar to what we see today. Senator Henry Clay on the Senate floor called it, quote, a detestable system. Detestable system. George William Curtis, one of the leaders in the fight to reform the civil service, said that the spoils system, quote, presents a most ridiculous, revolting, and disheartening spectacle. He said that through it, the United States, quote, seethes with intrigue and corruption. Over time, the pushback against this system and the damage it did to the United States government and its people built a reform movement that eventually resulted in the passage and enactment of the Pendleton Act in 1883. In many ways, the Pendleton Act brought our public service back to its original roots, codifying it, protecting it, by calling for an open selection of government employees and creating a civil service commission, our modern civil service. And it required that the applicants pass the civil service exam. The bill was the first domino in several that helped to restore trust in government by ensuring that those that served the people and not themselves. Served the people and not just some loyalty test. In so many ways, the battle that led to the passage of the Pendleton Act continues today and answers the first question I posed. How deep does our crisis in confidence in our government go? In short, it goes back to a friction we've seen for most of our history. It's a friction between those who want to use power for their gain, to enrich themselves and their party at the expense of other Americans. And on the other side, those who seek only to swear an oath to the Constitution and to deliver on the promise of making the next American generation more prosperous and secure. To have that sense of progress as a nation, which we know we cannot take for granted. We have to work for it. So when you look at Donald Trump or look at Elon Musk, you're not seeing something new. You're not seeing the disruptors they tell you that they are. You're not seeing an innovator. You're seeing something that's very old. Just another power-hungry politician, elite figure seeking to hoard power at the expense of real American families. In this moment right now, as I said, that is the moment of the greatest amount of inequality in our nation's history. And doing that by attacking the very people who work for the people. They are not beholden to the well-off and the well-connected. Another person leading the charge to bring us back to the golden age of corruption of the 1800s is a man named Russell Vought. Now, Russell Vought was born to make corruption safe again. As a staffer in the House and the Senate, he worked members of both chambers who attacked and demeaned civil servants in order to get them out of the way and let big corporate interests through. He worked for nearly a decade at the Heritage Foundation, taking dark corporate money and translating it into a systematic takedown of the same protections those corporations were lobbying against. When the Trump administration came into office in 2017, Mr. Vought was one of the first in the building at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Then, like now, senators had serious concerns when he was nominated, then for deputy director, and eventually director of OMB. Now this brings me to my second question. In what ways is the Trump administration putting their thumb on the scale for the well-off and well-connected? Well, let's look at it. Let's look at Project 2025. Mr. Vought's guidebook for attacking the core of the very principles that our founders wrote into the Constitution. Our founding fathers wanted to ensure checks and balances. They wanted to make sure we didn't swap one monarch for another. Vought believes that the president has the right to stop funds that Congress has approved from getting to the places we approve them to go. That means that even if your elected officials approve money to go towards building a road, or investing in a school in your community, or trying to get your kids child care, Russell Vought believes that Donald Trump should be able to just stop it from getting to them just because. Now, I say Donald Trump because Russell Vought is a champion of something called the, quote, unitary executive theory. Now, I know that may sound like a half-baked physics idea, but Vought believes that all of the power in the executive branch belongs to the president and the president alone. Mr. Vought even said in an interview just a few months ago that, quote, there are no independent agencies. Now, warping the power of the presidency to supersede Congress and the independence of agencies that have massive authority given to them, by the way, by Congress. They have these massive authorities to protect the American people. This is core in clearing the field for the well-off and the well-connected by warping that and trying to change the fundamental balance of our government across three branches. Finally, by weakening the ability to fund the work that they do and to operate independently, it is Mr. Vought's attacks on civil servants, the very positions put into place more than 140 years ago to stop rampant corruption and patronage. It is his attacks that threaten to bring us back in time. In a speech last year, Mr. Vought said he wants civil servants to be, quote, traumatically affected. He said, quote, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. He went on to say, we want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them, our public servants, in trauma. Trauma. He used that word, trauma. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. This is an American who is asking for our vote here in the U.S. Senate to be confirmed as a senior government official. Someone who will lead an incredibly important part of our executive branch. Be a top advisor to the president. An American who will take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. An American who is actively saying he wants to traumatize his fellow Americans, other Americans that have also sworn that oath to our Constitution. Now, Mr. President, I may disagree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but I don't wish to traumatize them. I don't wish them harm. How is it that we have found ourselves in this place where Americans call and see other Americans as the enemy? I talk with Democrats and Republicans across New Jersey. They may have disagreements, but they don't want to traumatize each other. This is not who we are as Americans, but it's what Mr. Vought wants to inflict on the people who show up to work each and every day to serve you, the American people. These are people who are trying to serve you, not themselves. But they're being demonized. They're being attacked, disrespected. And for those he can't traumatize out of a job, he's going to try to change their status as employees of the federal government so that he can push them out. Maybe you heard of something called Schedule F. Even if you haven't, let me put it into simple terms. Russell Vought wants to basically bring back the same policies that started the chain of events that led to the spoils system. He wants to make it so that civil servants have their protections removed, giving partisan leaders the ability to fire them and put in their own political staff. We're already hearing and seeing this. Reports that those at the White House and elsewhere are asking civil servants, asking those in jobs or seeking jobs who they voted for in the last election, about campaign donations, about party affiliation, rather than just their commitment to the Constitution. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would say that a president should have the ability to appoint their own staff, and I have agreement with that in broad strokes. But there's a reason why we have different kinds of government workers. It's because the government is meant to do the work of the people, not be completely bent to the will of a particular political party. I speak from personal experience. I was proud to be a civil servant. I believe I'm actually one of only a handful of members of Congress that currently serve that worked as a civil servant. I worked under President Bush and President Obama. I served a nation, not a party or a specific president. And that's the way it should be. And frankly, the oath that I swore as a civil servant is the same as what I recite here in this chamber. And we could all be better off if we take the mindset and approach of our civil servants. And if we just let President Trump fire civil servants and replace them with people like Mr. Vought or the people that Mr. Vought deems loyal enough to the president to bring on board, the protections our founders envisioned to prevent the corrupting influence of power and the corrupting power of that influence will completely override any ability to make change for the rest of us. And we are seeing this in real time right now. This leads me to my third question. What is the impact of this corruption and these attacks on our neighbors and our national security? Mr. President, the number of calls and emails and visits to my office I've gotten over the past weeks has been overwhelming. First of all, I want to thank everybody who has reached out to express their opinions and their concerns. We would be better off if we have that kind of consistent engagement from the American people, paying attention to the work that is being done in government and having their voices heard. And I want to thank my team for their service in being responsive to those concerns. Now, starting with a memo from OMB freezing federal funding, there has been panic across New Jersey and, frankly, the country about the funds that we approve as Congress, funds that are your funds as taxpayers. And they have been taken away from you by the Trump administration. I want to share a couple examples of the notes I've gotten from people in my state who are being hurt by the systematic attempt to fire civil servants and strip away programs that help working families, to clear the way for the Trump administration to let the well-off and the well-connected take control. As they get ready to plan for their big tax giveaway to the wealthiest Americans and the biggest corporations, taking that away from the rest of the American people. I got a letter from Julia, a community leader who runs an organization in Central Jersey that helps kids and seniors and people just trying to get by. She said, quote, "The new administration's pause on all activities related to obligations or disbursements of those funds for federal grants to non-governmental organizations would have an immediate and negative effect on the low-income, working folks we all serve across New Jersey. She went on to say, quote, children in Head Start and early Head Start, quality child care and after-school services improve the physical and cognitive development while their parents pursue employment and training, that these programs would struggle. WIC, nutrition programs that provide essential access to healthy foods for pregnant women and young children, leading to lifelong health benefits, that this would be on the chopping block. Pregnant women in our maternal health programs are less likely to have preterm or low birth weight deliveries with immediate and sustained health benefits and cost savings, that would be a detriment. Medicare navigation services for seniors on fixed, low incomes are helpful and enable them to live independent and longer. And that's something they won't be able to count on. For every child raised by a kinship caregiver, our state saves thousands in foster care payments it would otherwise incur with public dollars. It matters that these programs are delivered by nonprofit organizations that provide a continuum of services that support economic activity and make our whole community more resilient. This is one organization helping tens of thousands in our state. And I want to share one quick figure that stuck out to me. One of the approximately $13 million in grants they received, they estimate an economic benefit to New Jersey of around $52 million saved. So for my colleagues not convinced by our attempts to feed children and provide health care to seniors, you might be interested to hear that providing these services is the fiscally responsible thing to do as well. Let's look at the other impacts these draconian cuts could have on New Jersey families. We should work to keep our communities safe. If these cuts persist, grants to law enforcement and homeland security activities will be cut off, putting us in danger. We should work to be prepared for disasters like wildfires and hurricanes. Public assistance and hazard mitigation grants from the Disaster Relief Fund help communities quickly respond to, recover from, and prepare for major disasters. It might not go to the many communities that are struggling after severe natural disasters. As our neighbors in New Jersey continue to recover from storms from even more than a decade ago, as Superstorm Sandy shattered so many lives, continued to wreak havoc, and many of those families still not back in their homes. Our government should never abandon them. We should work to build the best infrastructure, roads and bridges and public transit and more. Take it into the next generation with universal broadband and connectivity on so many fronts that are necessary for all families. We should be able to work together to build that infrastructure so that your families can get to work and your kids can get to school and our businesses can thrive. But that funding is at risk. We should work to combat the fentanyl crisis and the mental health crisis by investing in proven programs that save lives, programs that could be on the chopping block if these cuts persist. We should invest in life-saving medical research so that this is the last generation that will have to suffer through cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes. Cutting this funding means cutting clinical trials at NIH clinical centers all across the country. The American people deserve better than that. We should work to provide the best education for our next generation. As a father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, I see every day the impacts a good education has on them. I'm myself a public school kid from New Jersey. Something that we're proud of in New Jersey. but knowing that we still have so much more work to do to make that available to everyone. This is a process we have to continue. You cannot take it for granted. Right now, Head Start programs that provide comprehensive early childhood education for more than 800,000 kids are being frozen. With teachers and staff not getting paid, programs may not be able to stay open. Childcare programs could also be next to close without funding being delivered. And our K through 12 schools will lose critical funding from Title I, IDEA, Impact Aid, and other programs that can keep their doors open. Lights on in the middle of the school year. From healthcare to small business support to protecting our veterans and providing support to those suffering through hunger, the examples of the kinds of impact and the people impacted by these cuts are almost endless. And they're a reminder of who is on the losing side when corruption and corporate greed win out. And beyond the impacts of our communities, on our communities, the impacts on our national security is real. And these stories of Mr. Musk and his band of 20-somethings raiding government agencies and making threats to workers isn't some example of brave tech disruptors innovating their way to efficiency and better results. In fact, what we're seeing from this administration is quite the opposite. Stories of dangerous incompetence. Late yesterday, the New York Times reported that the White House ordered the CIA to send an unclassified email listing all the employees hired over the past 2 years. Many of these new employees were hired to help us deal with the rising challenges of China and Russia, of other threats that we face out there. Now they're effectively being exposed, made vulnerable to our adversaries because Trump administration simply wants to traumatize public servants. We are doing the work of our adversaries for them. One example of this are the attacks that we see against USAID. And as I've seen what's unfolded this week at USAID, actually reminded me of my first moments in public service. A little over 20 years ago, I started my very first day working for the U.S. government. I remember walking up to the doors of the Ronald Reagan building because I was starting my first day at USAID. I had just graduated college, and I was proud to have a chance to serve this nation and proud to serve at a place like USAID. And it was the public servants there that showed me what community meant. Showed me that someone like me has every bit as much right to represent and to work and serve our country. Because it was something I wasn't sure about. When I first showed up to this town, I remember stepping out at Union Station, seeing the beautiful dome of the Capitol. And I was simultaneously inspired, but also terrified. I felt an imposter syndrome. Who am I to be able to represent and serve this country? I'm a son of immigrants, from a family of political nobodies. Serving this country, working in government, wasn't for me. I worked alongside public servants at USAID who helped with the rehabilitation of ex-child soldiers in Uganda. Others that worked on combating malaria and helping save millions of lives. I was working at USAID around the time of the Indian Ocean tsunami, if we remember that catastrophe, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake, killing an estimated 240,000 people in 14 nations across 2 continents. And USAID stepped up, helping support those families living in dire conditions, having faced a catastrophe unlike anything we had seen in generations, but also building towards the future, creating early warning systems across the world. It was USAID that helped deliver that to countries all across this world to help better prepare for the next disaster. Later in my career, I worked at the White House National Security Council. I was working on helping coordinate the counter-ISIS fight about a decade ago. I remember one particular moment in August 2014 where we saw ISIS going and attacking a religious minority of a people called the Yazidi people. And the Yazidis were forced out from their communities, and they fled up on top of a mountain called Sinjar Mountain, trying to take refuge there while they were surrounded by ISIS terrorists who were hell-bent on committing genocide and a mass atrocity. And we in the U.S. government were trying to figure out, what can we do? What can we do to try to help save these people, tens of thousands of people trapped on a mountain deep in enemy territory on the other side of the world? Can we help them with humanitarian airdrops? Is there a way we can build a humanitarian corridor off that mountain? Are there ways in which we can try to protect them from being annihilated? And you want to know who the first Americans were that went there? Under dangerous circumstances, deep in enemy territory. It was a USAID DART team, a disaster assistance response team, there alongside our military, that helped the President of the United States make decisions in the Situation Room about what to do next, about whether or not we were going to decide to protect these people or not. And the President, based off of the information provided by USAID, made the decision to conduct humanitarian airdrops, be able to provide overflight coverage and be able to provide support and security to those people when we were able to get them off of that mountain. And it was one of the finest moments I had ever seen in government. On those days, I saw the best of us, and I saw a government that can inspire. We see USAID working on disease eradication, on agriculture, global health, humanitarian aid and economic growth, food security, clean water, helping with the eradication of smallpox, saving countless lives through simple oral rehydration therapies, things like that had immeasurable countless benefits. It was a legacy that excited me when I walked up on my first day of work as a recent college grad. And then just this past Monday, I walked through those same doors at the Reagan building yet again, only to find it empty, apart from a security guard who I went up to, and he told me that he had instructions to bar and prevent any USAID employee from entering the building that day, to bar public servants from going to the office to do the work that they are entrusted by the American people to do. It was just despicable, the demonization of public servants. Now let's remember why USAID exists. That American global leadership has always been hand in hand with our foreign assistance, from the Marshall Plan forward, under both Democrats and Republicans. Kennedy in 1961, he said, quote, "The program requires highly professional, skilled service, attracting substantial numbers of high-caliber men and women capable of sensitive dealing with other governments, with a deep understanding of the process of economic development." He went on to say, in the face of these weaknesses and inadequacies of the previous system, that is it proper that we draw back and ask with candor a fundamental question: is a foreign aid program really necessary? And the answer to that is that there's no escaping our obligations, our moral obligations as a wise leader, a good neighbor in an interdependent community of free nations. And he said to fail to meet those obligations now would be disastrous and in the long run more expensive. For the widespread poverty and the chaos lead to a collapse of existing political and social structures, which would inevitably invite the advance of totalitarianism into every weak and unstable area. Thus, our own security would be endangered and our own prosperity imperiled. So Kennedy went on and called for an effort to, as he said, unified administration and operation, a single agency in Washington and the field, equipped with a flexible set of tools. And this was going to be drawing upon the most competent and dedicated career servants, now in the field and attracting the highest quality from every part of the nation. And he went on to say that he wanted to ensure that this was separate from our military assistance, for instance, because he said our program of aid to social and economic development must be seen on its own merits, judged in the light of its vital and distinctive contribution to our basic security needs. And he was clear in saying this was a bipartisan legacy, one that had moved forward under the leaderships of two great presidents, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, drawn its support from forward-looking members of both political parties in the Congress and throughout the nation. And he said it's about American global leadership. Now, there's a reason why the USAID headquarters is at the Reagan building. Reagan continued that emphasis on development and humanitarian aid. He said, quote, "The ultimate importance to the United States of our security and development assistance programs cannot be exaggerated." Another quote that's actually quite apt for this moment, he said, "You know the excuses. We can't afford foreign aid anymore, or we're wasting money pouring it into these poor countries, or we can't buy friends. Other countries just take the money and dislike us for giving it." Well, all these excuses are just that, excuses. And Reagan says they're dead wrong. Now we have a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, saying USAID takes taxpayer funds and, quote, spends it as a global charity, irrespective of whether it's the national interest or not the national interest. But you know who else said that the work of USAID isn't charity, like Kennedy, like Reagan? It was Marco Rubio just a few years ago. Quote, "Foreign aid is not charity," he said. "We must make sure it is well spent, but it is less than 1% of budget and critical to our national security." Rubio went on to say, quote, "We don't have to give foreign aid. We do so because it furthers our national interests. That's why we give foreign aid." He said, quote, "Anyone who tells you that we can slash foreign aid and that will bring us balance to our budget is lying to you. Foreign aid is less than 1% of our budget. It's just not true." Look, there can always be space to review our foreign assistance. I worked in these organizations. I know there are places that we can try to fine-tune, make more efficient, make more effective. If there are programs that Congress and members of Congress have questions about, that's ripe for our oversight role. But to undermine USAID as a whole is flat wrong. We see this with Secretary Rubio's first trip this past weekend. He went to Panama, complained about Panama accepting support from China through the Belt and Road Initiative. Yet he then goes on to help Trump and Musk gut USAID, a critical tool that we have to counter Chinese influence. And it very much exposes that this America First foreign policy really means America only. And if we continue down this path, we will find ourselves alone. Over the years of our global power, our strategic advantage has always been in building coalitions. And in this dangerous global environment, this America First approach leaves us distracted from the real threats and challenges. This is about American global leadership. I think about my own family. My parents, born during the Korean War. They grew up, the very first Americans they ever met were American service members and other Americans that were there to try to help Korea rebuild. It wasn't just America's resolve in the war, it was about what happened afterwards in terms of helping provide assistance. Americans taking action to feed kids like my parents. As I said earlier, 50 years ago, my parents decided to come to America. They knew nobody here. Not a single person. They didn't know anybody in the entire Western Hemisphere of planet Earth. But my parents moved here to America because America meant something to them. It's because they met the best of us. Americans abroad, willing to work in dangerous places, in tough circumstances, wanting to try to live out the values of our country. And we learn it's not just the GDP of our nation that makes us a leader. It is the projection of our values, and ultimately, it is our people. Now we are pulling back our foreign assistance. We are closing the door to immigrants like my parents. This is, unfortunately, a moment of American withdrawal. That is not what the American people want. They wanted a government that was focused on them instead of billionaires and the biggest corporations, but they understand the importance of American leadership. When I talk to leaders and officials in other countries, I remember there's one situation where I talked to one, and he said something to me that really just stuck in my mind. He said, I just want you to know, when I talk to other leaders around the world, when we talk about America, this official I was talking about, he said, we ask ourselves the question, is America a reliable partner? And he asked that question knowing full well what the answer is, and we know what the answer is, which is we are not the reliable partner we should be. And this isn't just about USAID. We know USAID, that these attacks, it's only just the beginning. It's the canary in the coal mine. Next, there will be the Department of Education or Justice or FBI or elsewhere. Schedule F, an effort to kill the civil service, return to the spoil systems of 200 years ago. And it goes back to Russell Vought. I want to emphasize that quote I said earlier because it's worth emphasizing in this moment. He said, quote, we want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma. When you listen to those words, doesn't that sound like exactly what happened over the last week? When I get these phone calls and texts from people at USAID, people that I worked with, texting me, telling me, quote, things are very grave, talking about how disrespected they feel. And it saddens me greatly to think that Trump and Musk and Mr. Vought and others are relishing in that anxiety, fear, and pain that they are purposefully trying to create. In an interview with Tucker Carlson, Vought says Trump, quote, has to move executively as fast and as aggressively as possible with a radical constitutional perspective to be able to dismantle that bureaucracy and their power centers. Now, why do you think they need to move so fast? It's because when you want to grab as much power as you can, you want to do it before the American people understand and see what's happening. They feed off the apathy and the helplessness. They want people to be disengaged. They are intentionally using terms like shock and awe, a term of war that we had used. Now they're using that against the American people. I've been saying this line a lot lately where I say I believe that the opposite of democracy is apathy. We have to stay engaged. There is a massive division in our country, no doubt about that. It's not just between Democrats and Republicans, it's between those who are engaged and those who aren't. And these actions are built to paralyze you with anger, fueled by disinformation and distraction to make you disengage. But don't let them. So what comes next? All we have to do is look at Mr. Vought's past statements to know exactly what's coming. He said, quote, what we're trying to do is identify the pockets of independence and seize them. When he was talking about the Federal Reserve, he went on to say, quote, it's very hard to square the Fed's independence with the Constitution. That quote of his led me to ask him directly in a confirmation hearing if he believes that the president has the right to set interest rates in our country, and Mr. Vought refused to answer. Couldn't answer something as simple as that. The answer should be very easy. It should be clearly no. And I talked to a number of leaders at the Fed recently. They really emphasized the long-standing bipartisan agreement that we do not want someone approaching critical decisions about fiscal stability in America based off of what's best for the next election for that leader. We don't want to see that kind of politicization. The goal always needs to be towards the stability of our economy and the responsibility towards growth and prosperity. Vought, he just believes in power. It's not just any kind of power. He believes in an all-powerful president, something our founding fathers specifically avoided. We don't want a monarch. We have co-equal branches of government. But is that what the American people have seen since January 20th? No, we've seen blatant power grabs, illegal actions, disregard of laws passed by Congress, chaos. But remember, as you see this, chaos is their plan. It's Trump's plan. It's Mr. Vought's plan. It's the reason why they're going after public servants. And it's the same reason that happened 200 years ago, because public service is about serving the people, while corruption, we see, is about serving themselves. Public service was the answer to countering corruption in the 1800s, and it is my belief that it is the answer to the current threat to our democracy. When you see these attacks on public servants, when you see what is unfolding before our eyes, that's not the golden age that Trump tried to talk about in his inaugural address. It's not the Make America Great Again slogan that he's been using. It goes back to another phrase that he used over the campaign where he talked about, quote, the enemy from within. Those three words, enemy from within. That's what this is all about. Painting our public servants who swear an oath to protect our Constitution as the enemy. Earlier, I talked about my parents coming to the United States 50 years ago. Now, my family, we think about the next 50 years. Now I'm a parent of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, 2 little boys. And I'll be honest with you, I worry about what kind of America my boys are going to grow up in. What will it look like? What will this country look like when they are my age? So that's why I'm here. That's why I stand here on the floor of the Senate. I'm here because I refuse to believe that my kids and their generation are doomed to grow up in a broken America. I still believe in the America that inspired my parents 50 years ago to travel halfway around the world for. And I know we're not the only family out there that believes in this. There is a hunger in this country for reform and change. People don't want to see the status quo, but that doesn't mean they want to hand over our country to corruption, hand it over to patronage, hand it over for another generation of the worst inequality our nation's ever seen, where every day it gets worse. As I mentioned before, we just took on and fought against machine politics in New Jersey. I heard it straight from the people. They don't want to see that kind of rise of broken machine politics across our nation. Corruption is the quickest way to take the strongest, most powerful nation in the world and send it into decline. In just a little over a year, we will have our 250th anniversary as a nation. And as I close here, I want us to reflect on that. 250 years. I hope we can commit as a nation to have that more than just about fireworks. That we use that as a moment to try to rededicate ourselves to the mission of this country, to the purpose of this nation, and why it began. After the January 6th riots, the way I framed it is I said I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to trying to solve one singular question. which is how do we heal this country? I believe the answer to that question is service. That we need a new ask not what this country can do for you moment, a reminder that we're part of something bigger than all of us. Instead of attacking public service, we should be promoting and encouraging this. And I hope on our 250th anniversary, we rededicate ourselves to this project. Build a national service program. Invest in civics education. We need to reject the divisiveness that is infecting our nation and restore a sense of trust. We start by rejecting this dangerous nomination to do just that. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back the balance of my time.